great to be with you today. I'm going to try and provoke you starting after lunch, wake you up and say, you're a hypocrite. You are, and you are, and you are. And so am I. I'm speaking here at an event to do with sustainability and climate, and I flew from New York City yesterday when the train was available. I'll explain more in a second why I did that. But why am I saying this? Why am I making this point? I think, first of all, I'm going to go back to the start of the question here. What is the additive approach in behavioral science? And I'll loop back to explain what all that has to do with hypocrisy. Because behavioral science can add a tremendous amount to what we do in terms of climate sustainability. And I'm going to give you some examples of the different ways it can do that, drawing on our work from the Behavioural Insights Team. So the first example is around encouraging recycling in Brazil, in Fortaleza. And the goal here was to get people to use more of the recycling spots that were set up. And one way we did this was, well, we want people to come to the recycling centers. We want to use information to encourage them to do so. We want that information to be effective. And behavioral science can do a lot to make information more effective. So we say things like, we give the map. We show people how easy it is to get to these centers. We can enhance the use of information that way. Sure, that's very helpful. What we also did was we thought about it from a different perspective. We thought about what are people already doing? We thought about where are people actually already dumping rubbish? What are the existing patterns of behavior? And then we said, well, why don't we try and locate the recycling centers in the places where the behaviors are already happening? So rather than thinking about we have people who we want to come to us, we think about how we go to people, how we can flip that around. We can change the perspective of what we're doing here. And that's a really important and powerful thing because quite often we're thinking about something we've set up, a behavior we want to encourage. But taking a wider approach suggests that we can think about existing patterns of behavior and shaping an offer around that. And that's often easier to do because changing behavior can be hard. A different additive way of thinking about behavioral science is rather than taking pre-existing ideas and concepts, like go to where the behavior is, make it easy, we also can look at the data. We can run experiments. We can say, what have we discovered we might not have expected? And so here's some work we did in Portland, Oregon, where we were running an experiment to say, what kind of approach makes it more likely people will sign up to a bike share scheme that was being launched? But actually, that's not what I'm going to talk to you about. We also found something else in the data, which, as you can see on the left-hand side here, the people who had recently moved to their street were much more likely to take up the bike share scheme than the people who'd been there for a while. And we know that this is often the case from behavioral science because when habits are disrupted, when people are in a state of change, they've been more likely to take up a new behavior as a result. It's that timely moment of change that can make a difference. And the timing of offers is often neglected. So again, because we're doing these experiments, we have the data and we're looking for patterns, we can add a new perspective that way by linking it to an existing concept, in this case, making it timely. And then a final example is also about challenging assumptions. So this is looking at one of the more neglected parts of sustainability, about repairing. The French government commissioned my colleagues to develop a repairability index, which tried to show, in this case, laptops, which were the most repairable, the ones who you're least likely to have to get a replacement for later. So we ran experiments online to find out what was the most effective kind of symbol for this index, and it turned out to be the one on the top. And then we tested it in the real world with 140,000 people making real purchases of laptops. And you can see it was included in the screen here. And we ran this as a randomized trial. And we found that if you included that index, it actually had no effect. It didn't do anything. But what was interesting was it led people to buy fewer laptops, which we're not expecting. And introducing the repairability index logo led suppliers, vendors, to stock more repairable laptops over the longer term. there was a ripple effect, second-order systemic changes to behavior that maybe we weren't expecting. Again, because we're looking at how you can reassess your assumptions and build a more sophisticated picture of behavior as a result. Okay? So to sum up, there are three main additive approaches that behavioral science can offer. One is enhancing existing kind of attempts to, say, persuade people to change behavior, drawing on evidence, new techniques that can be used. The second one is this kind of data-driven experimental approach, finding new patterns in the data and building our understanding from there. And the third one is what I call the lens approach, and I think this is really important. So this says that behavioral science is not just about a tool to change behavior. It's also, I think, more fundamentally, a lens through which we see actions, a way of reassessing our assumptions, potentially, of actually reflecting back on maybe we need to think about what people are already doing rather than attempting to change their behavior. Rather than being a tool we pick up for a particular task, it's a lens through which we see what is the best tool, what is the problem here, how can we assess what we're doing as well, and rethink that. Now I want to go back to being hypocrites and see what we can apply here. So the first thing is, I've been thinking about this quite a bit because I've just written a book on hypocrisy. It's coming out next year. But it's really important for sustainability as well because it's an accusation that comes along a lot. I just took this from one newspaper really quickly. Many accusations of hypocrisy of people who are making a case for environmental change. And the problem here is that it's used as a method of attack to invalidate claims which in themselves may be right. Like, but you could say, but you're a hypocrite, so I'm not going to listen. So what can behavioral science say about this? Well, first of all, it can reveal ways that, well, first of all, we can be more consistent. We can make our intentions and our actions into closer alignment. There are things like a technique called induced hypocrisy, where in a supportive environment, you point out to someone the gap between their public statements about what they believe in and their private behaviors that don't always live up to it. Now, one outcome of this can be you bring your behaviors into line with your statements. There are various ways of addressing that, and bringing the intention-action gap close together. But we can also test these things and see what are our expectations? Are they right? How does it really function in practice? So here's an example of a study which tried to look at how can hypocrisy harm your persuasiveness in the environmental space. And so what you've got here is, suppose someone is trying to persuade you to take up renewable energy sources. What they tested was, is that person, firstly, is it an expert or a neighbor? But then also, do you find out that that person is incredibly sustainable, doesn't eat meat, doesn't fly, does all the right things, almost to a slightly scary extent? Or do you have, for example, someone who is a massive hypocrite, who is telling you to be more renewable, but is flying all over the place, is eating red meat every day, et cetera, and then someone in the middle, someone who's kind of reasonably making efforts to be sustainable. And what this shows is, on the right-hand side, you've got the people who are the hypocrites. And higher is better in this outcome. And you can see that, yes, particularly if you're an expert, being a hypocrite does harm your persuasiveness. Less so if you're a neighbor. But what's really interesting here is that you can see that the middle one is actually the highest in terms of persuasiveness. There's something called do-gooder derogation. If you think the person is doing almost too good a job, they're unrelatable. They're almost intimidating. It's hard to relate to them, and they can actually be less effective. If it's a neighbor, you might think of, say, Ned Flanders in The Simpsons. There's a backfire, okay? But that may not be immediately intuitive. We need the data, we need the experiments to work out the psychology of what's going on here, and it really matters. And therefore, thinking about the final thing, which is the lens approach, behavioral science can help us understand the dynamic here of what's going on with accusations of hypocrisy. Because what can happen is people can be so scared of being accused of being a hypocrite that they don't try, they don't have ambitions. They walk away because it's one of the worst things you can be accused of. And it may be that the people making those accusations are actually doing it partly motivated because it makes them feel better about the gap that they feel between intentions and actions. We've all been there. There are structural reasons we may end up being hypocrites. I'm flying back because I have to be back for my daughter. My wife's going to Providence for work. It wasn't really possible for me to get the train. There are all these barriers all the time, structural reasons why we don't live up to our intentions. Now, I'm not saying we get rid of criticism of hypocrisy altogether, because sometimes it's used for deception, sometimes it's used for purposes which take us back rather than forward. But I think we need to work out, and behavioral science can really help, about the kinds of hypocrisy we tolerate, because we have to tolerate some, because it's inevitable, and those we condemn. And I think this is a really important additive factor for behavioral science in the future, getting under the hood and working out what's going on here so we can get to a better future. Thank you, everyone.